You're standing in a crowded room, your emotions swirling around you like a dark storm. Someone makes a cutting remark, not just a casual poke, but a calculated jab that pierces something deep within. Your chest tightens, and you feel a slow burn radiating from the pit of your stomach, rising up into your throat. Every impulse screams for you to lash out or retreat into numbness. In that moment, you hover between two worlds, one where your anger rules you, and another where you wield it like a hidden blade. Yet somewhere, buried under all those centuries of cultural norms and moral guidelines, there's a paradox you can't ignore. Anger is condemned as destructive, toxic, and primitive. Society warns you to bury it, hide it, or find ways to extinguish it. But in the same breath, countless stories and legends celebrate the hero whose righteous fury topples empires and redefines history. We're told to be calm and collected, yet our greatest cultural heroes often rise on the waves of revolutionary anger, forging art, philosophy, or movements that change the course of humanity. Does suppressing this undesirable emotion rob you of a potential superpower? Does our attempt to be perpetually balanced and good clip the wings of an inner beast that could carry you to new heights? Is it possible that in swallowing anger, we also swallow our ability to transcend the ordinary? Pause for a moment and imagine tapping into anger not as a destructive force, but as an engine that propels you to become more resolute, passionate, and authentically alive. It's as if you've stumbled upon an ancient form of energy, volatile but potent, easily mishandled, yet capable of fueling monumental feats. Here lies the great question that underpins your unrest. Could anger be more than just a sin to be purged? Could it be the hidden key to unlocking your highest potential? Let that question simmer. Let it unsettle you. Because the more you dwell on it, the more you sense there's something bigger behind the scenes, something that touches the very essence of who you are. And so we stand on the edge of a revelation. Anger is neither purely friend nor enemy until you decide what to make of it. Anger, as a human emotion, appears both primal and mysterious. On one hand, it arises in the flicker of an instant. An insult, a betrayal, or an injustice can spark it. On the other hand, it can linger beneath the surface for years, shaped by social expectations, unspoken traumas, and personal insecurities. It's as though anger is an entity unto itself, living, breathing, and waiting for the right trigger to burst forth. But why does it hold such power over us? To understand this, look into the works of thinkers like Carl Jung, who believed that unacknowledged emotions, particularly the shadow aspects of our psyche, accumulate energy. Anger often gets sequestered into the dark recesses of our unconscious because it clashes with our socially acceptable persona, the good person we want the world to see. As a result, we repress it, and in the process, we lose conscious control over this force. What is denied in the light, Jung posits, grows monstrous in the dark. Friedrich Nietzsche was perhaps one of the most provocative philosophers to address such primal drives. In his view, the will to power, the fundamental drive behind human activity, includes not just ambition or intellect, but also the surge of emotion that compels you to overcome obstacles. Nietzsche dared to explore the possibility that anger could be channeled as a creative, even life-affirming force. He railed against what he called slave morality, the societal pressure to be meek and unassuming, arguing that anger, harnessed with purpose, can fuel greatness. Yet, conventional wisdom tells you to calm down, count to 10, or walk it off. We're taught from childhood that anger is unacceptable. It's something to be minimized or disguised. Think about how many times you've been told to manage your anger rather than understand it. The hidden problem here is not the emotion itself, but our collective refusal to listen to what it might be telling us. As Arthur Schopenhauer once suggested, the emotional life of a human being is as genuine and reflective of reality as our logical reasoning. Dismissing anger as a mere tantrum misses the complexity of its message. This cultural and psychological conditioning runs deep. From a young age, you learn to be nice, which can quickly become a code word for non-confrontational. You internalize the belief that if you're angry, you're automatically wrong or irrational. But anger, by its very nature, signals that something vital is at stake, perhaps your dignity, your values, or your deeply held boundaries. It is a flare shot up from your unconscious mind, alerting you to the presence of threat or injustice. So, why do we have such a troubled relationship with this potent emotion? Because we've inherited centuries of moral and religious instruction that label anger as the gateway to sin. Because modern psychology often frames anger solely as a stress response to be mitigated rather than a window into your deeper motivations. Because we live in societies that prize politeness and order over raw honesty, even if that honesty might be the catalyst for transformation. In clinging to the belief that anger is something to be snuffed out, we ignore its potential as a messenger, a guide to what truly matters. It may be telling you that you're being mistreated, that your potential is stagnating, or that your moral code is being violated. Anger waves a flag that says, "Look closely. Something important is happening here." Still, there's a persistent tension. If anger is so essential, why does it so often lead to destructive behavior? This question gnaws at the back of your mind. Can you embrace anger without letting it consume you? Perhaps the real peril lies not in the emotion itself, but in the refusal to face it head on. It's time to pull back the veil and see how this hidden force quietly molds your decisions and relationships, shaping not just your fate, but that of the entire society around you. Take a closer look at the subtle ways anger influences your life. Because it's relegated to the shadow realm, it doesn't simply vanish. Instead, it mutates. Unacknowledged anger often becomes passive aggression, a simmering hostility that leaks out in sarcasm, procrastination, or low-grade contempt. Or it transforms into self-loathing, that gnawing internal voice that punishes you for feeling emotions you've been taught to suppress. It can also morph into a worldview of perpetual resentment, where you see enemies everywhere, and each day becomes a silent battle for self-preservation. Beneath this outward veneer of composure, your mind weaves complex justifications. Cognitive biases, like the confirmation bias, kick in, scanning your environment for proof that your anger is either justified or that it must stay hidden. Meanwhile, negativity bias intensifies every minor slight into a catastrophic affront, further fueling the fire you're trying to hide. This internal tug-of-war saps your mental energy, making you feel both exhausted and strangely alive, caught between the fear of losing control and the exhilaration of tiptoeing near your emotional limits. On a societal level, the consequences are staggering. When whole communities pretend anger doesn't exist or dismiss it as unproductive, they create a climate of stifled discontent. People who might otherwise channel their fury into social reform or groundbreaking art instead suffocate under polite indifference. Genuinely urgent issues, corruption, injustice, inequality, fester because the emotional spark that could ignite meaningful change has been dampened in favor of a collective facade of calm. Think of every historical revolution, every civil rights movement, every pivotal act of protest. Anger, when fused with moral clarity, has the power to reshape the world. But let's not ignore the flip side. Anger without introspection can wreak havoc. It becomes a raging beast that devours everything in its path. Nietzsche himself warned that the same force which can propel you toward greatness can also lead you into ruin if you allow it to run wild. The line is razor thin between righteous indignation and mindless rage. Failing to see that line is where we stumble, both individually and collectively. When we deny our anger a legitimate place, we never learn how to wield it. That's the real danger. Untrained, misunderstood, and misdirected. Anger can isolate us from loved ones, corrode our mental well-being, and sow chaos in places that desperately need constructive solutions. Rather than forging alliances to address problems, we might lash out at those closest to us or spiral into bitterness. Slowly, a wedge forms between your true self and the outer world, a wedge built from the very emotion that, ironically, might have been your ticket to authenticity and action. This is where the urgency comes in, because living in denial of your anger is like living with a sleeping volcano beneath your home. You can try to forget about it, plant a garden on its slopes, even set up picnic tables and enjoy the view. Yet all the while, molten tension simmers below the surface, ready to erupt at the smallest seismic shift. When that happens, it doesn't just wreck your backyard, it leaves you standing amidst ashes and scorched earth, wondering how things got so completely out of control. And so, you arrive at the crux. Continuing to repress anger is no longer an option if you want to live fully. If you want to break free from cycles of resentment and passive aggression, you're beginning to see that anger, left unexamined, dictates far more than your outbursts. It shapes your identity, your relationships, and even your contributions to society. The crucial question is whether you will let anger remain your hidden saboteur or whether you will learn to wield it as your secret weapon. The next step is to rebel, to break from the chains of cultural conditioning that say anger is always bad or that you should fear this force within. It's time to look at radical ways to transform anger from a source of self-destruction into the catalyst for your metamorphosis. The first act of rebellion is to acknowledge your anger, not just in passing, but intimately, like greeting a neglected part of your own mind. Imagine it as a wild creature living in your interior world. You've kept it locked in a cage in some dark corridor, hoping it would starve or lose its power. Now, instead of avoiding it, you step into that corridor, unlock the cage, and see your anger for what it truly is: raw energy waiting for direction. Ask yourself, what is my anger telling me? Perhaps it's highlighting an unmet need, a boundary that's been trampled, or a deeply cherished value that has been compromised. Maybe it's urging you to take a stand against an oppressive situation at work, or it's warning you that a close relationship has become toxic. By casting light upon these truths, you free anger from its shameful imprisonment and enlist it as your ally in the search for resolution. Yet simple recognition isn't enough. You must then channel it. Think of the anger you feel as hot coals. If you hold them in your bare hands, you'll be burned. But if you harness them, direct their heat to fuel a forge, you can craft something remarkable. Historical examples abound. Iconic figures from civil rights leaders to groundbreaking artists have used their anger as a clarifying force that drove them to change the status quo. They refused to let that energy implode into bitterness. Instead, they shaped it into action, art, advocacy, or philosophy that resonated through generations. A key practice here is to find constructive outlets. This could mean journaling with brutal honesty, pouring out the anger on paper until you uncover its core. Or it might involve rigorous physical activity that lets you feel your own strength, reminding you that anger can energize rather than paralyze. For some, it manifests in activism, turning personal fury into a communal push for justice. Whatever the outlet, the aim is to direct anger outward in a creative, purposeful way, rather than letting it fester inwardly. However, the most radical shift happens on the mindset level. Friedrich Nietzsche insisted on reevaluating the moral assumptions that labeled anger as inherently evil. Instead of viewing it as a moral failing, see it as a sign of life, passion, and conviction. This doesn't mean you excuse toxic or harmful actions. Instead, you approach anger with curiosity. What deeper truth is seeking expression here? When you do this, anger becomes an impetus for growth, pushing you to refine your beliefs, sharpen your values, and act in accordance with them. Rebellion also means refusing to be manipulated by those who exploit your unexamined anger. Society is rife with forces, political, commercial, or cultural, that benefit when your anger is either left aimless or directed at scapegoats. Understanding the psychological mechanics behind anger immunizes you from such manipulation. You can see when your anger is being stoked for someone else's agenda, and you can choose to channel it for your own higher purposes instead. Above all, remember that rebellion, in this context, is about seizing responsibility. You refuse to say, "My anger controls me." Instead, you declare, "I control my anger." You're not letting it vanish or take over. You're forging a partnership with it. This stance demands self-reflection, discipline, and, yes, a certain boldness that modern society might deem reckless. But consider this your wake-up call. The bold are often the ones who redefine what it means to be human. When you rebel against the taboo on anger, you reclaim a portion of your psyche that was exiled to the realm of shame. In doing so, you begin to reclaim your personal sovereignty, the right to feel, to act, and to live with unflinching honesty. And this is only the beginning, because once you've established this rebellion, you stand on the threshold of a revelation that has the power to remake your reality from the inside out. Here you stand, having walked the corridors of your mind and faced down the caged beast of anger. You've begun to sense its raw, transformative power, no longer just an unwanted intruder, but a source of untapped potential. Now comes the ultimate truth, the epiphany that both Nietzsche and other visionaries have hinted at across ages. Anger, when consciously harnessed, is the fire that reveals who you truly are. In this final moment of clarity, you recognize that your anger was never just about hurt pride or frustration at external events. It was always pointing towards something deeper, your capacity for self-overcoming. Anger stirs so violently because it has something crucial to protect: your individuality, your ideals, the substance of what makes you alive and vibrant. Realize that when you kneel before your anger, letting it trample you or define you, you lose that spark of authenticity. But when you stand tall, meeting anger as an equal, you unlock the hidden dimension of your potential. It's as though you've discovered a new lens through which to view all your life struggles. Where once you saw only the destructive potential of anger, you now see an amplifier, a way to intensify your commitment to truth, justice, creativity, or any value that resonates with your deepest self. Through this lens, that initial spark of rage becomes the moment you hear a clarion call to your highest self. Are you going to accept the status quo or redefine it? The final realization is that anger is not an end. It's a threshold. Step through it, and you step into a realm where you set your own terms, where your passions, both bright and dark, unite to form the complete tapestry of your identity. This is what Nietzsche meant by becoming who you are, acknowledging every part of your psyche, especially the parts society has taught you to reject. In doing so, you no longer fragment yourself into disowned facets. You become whole, and in wholeness lies your true power. Think back to the times in human history when entire cultures repressed their anger, urging everyone to smile and nod, while beneath the surface, resentment festered. Eventually, that repressed force exploded, often violently. Now see, by contrast, how each personal revolution, be it in art, science, or social justice, arose from someone daring to let their frustration become focused determination. Your personal evolution follows that same trajectory. Every creative masterpiece, every societal shift, every bold new idea has roots in a sense that something is wrong, that something must change, and that conviction is frequently ignited by anger. The next time you feel that heat rising within, remember this: it is a summons to courage. Let yourself feel it without judgment, then direct that energy where it needs to go. When you do, you'll sense an extraordinary shift, as if a great cosmic gear has clicked into place. Suddenly, those same slights and constraints that once provoked blind rage will become opportunities for you to refine your perspective or take bold action. You'll move from victim to creator, from reactive to proactive. And now, let the conclusion settle in your bones. Anger is no mere hindrance to a peaceful life. It's a vital current running through the river of your existence. When you align that current with your highest values, you tap into a wellspring of insight, willpower, and authentic passion. It's not a path of guaranteed comfort or acceptance, but it's the path of aliveness, where every breath resonates with purpose, every obstacle becomes a challenge to grow, and every day dawns as a new chance to transcend the old limitations. Like a cinematic finale, you're left with an urgent, empowering invitation. Embrace your anger, not as a curse to be exiled, but as a power to be guided. Acknowledge its primal roar, and let it remind you that you are more than the sum of your tamest parts. In that acceptance, you'll discover a fierce kind of freedom, a freedom to become the architect of your life, fueled by the spark that was always waiting inside you. Now, the choice is yours. Will you heed its call, or will you bury it once more? That choice, made in the quiet chambers of your heart, defines not only how you use anger, but ultimately how you step into your own greatness. Let that final realization echo long after you've finished pondering these words, because once you've seen anger's true nature, a potential superpower of both destruction and creation, you can never unsee it. And perhaps that is exactly what you needed all along.